Good day, I am Maria Cecilia Calbasa, the last presenter of our group, and I'm here to discuss the last two topics under Chapter 6, which is under Decentralization and Local Governance. To start off, let's discuss the second to the last topic, which is people's participation in rural and urban development. Well, people's participation has been given utmost priority both in urban and rural development. Instead of imposing development from the above, nowadays development is promoted from below sector. Rural development was recently considered as a state-led and state-induced development program. Now, due to consequent unification of markets, it was found out that the state was no longer in position or capable of carrying forward a huge task of community development single-handedly. So confusion starts, and the scholars soon find ways on how to ease things up. Now, this is where the NGOs started. NGOs help in mobilizing local resources to be used for development. They help in building a self-reliant and sustainable society. These agencies play the role of mediator between people and government. They are actually the facilitator and development in education and professionalization. Now, the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992 endorsed that the complementaries between voluntary organizations and the panchayats in rural development, and with this integration, they can effectively attain larger goals for which the country has been struggling for decades. Now, the government of India started to make a formal policy deal with the voluntary sectors. Now, the policy acknowledged the partnering role of voluntary sector, including community-based organization, NGO, civil society organization, and so on in the national development. Now, this policy recognizes three instruments of partnership. Number one, consultation through a formal process of interaction at the center, the state, and district level. Number two, strategic collaboration to tackle complex interventions where sustained social mobilization is critical over a long period of time. And third, project funding through standard schemes will soon be developed. Now, the government will ensure that these three instruments of partnership are given due attention in annual plans prepared by the ministries and the states. Now, what are the role of NGO and citizens group in urban development? The urban NGO may forge links between beneficiaries and level of governments, donors, and local financial institutions. A central purpose of the urban NGO may be to provide services directly to other organizations and to perform coordination or networking services that will be of support to the poor. Hence, there has been a partnership between the state and market and the NGO sector in the name of Public-Private Partnership or PPP. Now, there are lists of major rural and urban development programs and their management. To start off, number one is Community Development Program. Now, this is a contextual reference of Comprehensive Community Development Plan, which can be tracked back as early as 1943 and be more specific in the campaign for increased in food production during the devastating famine in the year 1943. Now, subsequently, this took an organized form and it was named Grow More Food Campaign, or the GMFC. Now, this campaign had two-pronged approach. First was to put more and more potential productive land under agriculture, and second was to induce farmers to increase farm production. Now, IADP was introduced later on with an intention to correct the CDP's relative priority on agriculture. Now, the rationale behind the introduction of this program was the acute food crisis during the late 1950s, and consequent recommendations by the Agriculture Production Team from Ford Foundation, USA, was matched effort to enhance agricultural produce on the existency basis. Now, self-reliant in food production was guiding motive of this program. Since augmentation of agricultural production formed the core of this program, naturally, farm planning, including identification of appropriate modalities for management, became an inseparable part of it. Now, however, IADP failed to live up to the expectations and was felt that it required to be supplemented with another program which geared towards the same goal. Now, Intensive Agricultural Areas Program, or the IAAP, was introduced. Together, they introduced a new strategy. These distinguishing features of the new program or these new strategies are stress on high-yielding varieties, optimum utilization of production in areas with assured irrigation and rainfall by higher inputs through the intensive agricultural programs. Next is introduction of short duration crops and effective utilization of the irrigation potential. Now, these strategies are still in operation. Special programs were launched from 1950s onwards with the intention to target weaker points and to answer specific areas during those crises. Now, number one is the Small Farmer Development Agency. Now, this was to give breather to those small farmers who could not afford to have or capitalize in any crops. Number two is the Marginal Farmers and Agricultural Laborer Scheme. Now, this scheme is sought to bail out marginal farmers and agriculture laborers from the vicious cycle of low productions, and this project was financed partly in the form of subsidies and partly in the form of loans from other cooperative and commercial banks. Next is the Drought-Prone Area Program. Now, this program was sought to reduce the severity of impact of drought along with restoring ecological balance and income stabilization of the people. Now, number of measures were earmarked during this program. Number one, development and management of water resources. Number two, soil and moisture conservation. Next, afforestation, restructuring and cropping, pattern and pasture development, changes in agronomic practices. Next is livestock and dairy development. Next is development of small farmers, marginal farmers, and agricultural laborers. Another program was developed, and this is the Desert Development Program. Now, this is to bring down the adverse impact of drought within the area. The activities initiated under this program were those of afforestation, water harvesting, rural electrification, animal husbandry, along with sand dune stabilization and shelter belt protection in the hot desert areas. Next is the Hill Area Development Program. This was initiated to bring about all-around development to those people residing in those rugged terrains. Another program that was developed was Wage Employment and Infrastructure Development Program. Now, the problem of structure and rural unemployment refused to die down, so the government initiated concerted efforts in this direction, and accordingly, several supplementary employment generation schemes were formed. Another program is that the Crash Scheme of Rural Employment. The central objective of this program was to alleviate rural poverty along with generating durable assets in the rural areas. Next is the Food for Work Program. The uniqueness of this program was that under this program, surplus food grains were used to wage payment as a subsidized rate. Another one is the National Rural Employment Program. The major objective of this program were to generate an additional gainful employment for the unemployed and underemployed men and women in the rural areas, to generate durable community assets, to strengthen the rural infrastructure, which would lead to rapid growth of the rural economy, steady rise in income and level the poor, and the improvement of their nutritional status and living standards. Now, this was launched in 1989, and it was the Jawahar Rohar Yohana. Now, this sought to provide additional employment opportunities to unemployed rural people during the lean season. Next is Operation Flood. This is with view to achieve self-sufficiency in milk and milk products. The program laid emphasis on the following areas. Number one, it sought to upgrade dairy processing facilities and capacities of the produce, including setting up new city milk plants. Number two, it sought to put up a major portion of the urban market under the coverage of modern dairies. Number three, it sought to develop basic transportation infrastructure along with strengthening the storage network to overcome regional and seasonal shortfall of milk production. Number four, it sought to improve milk procurement system in rural areas. And lastly, finally, it sought to bring about all-over improvement of dairy farming through an improved program of feeding and management, animal breeding, vet services, feed supplies, and other related services. Next program is the Antodaya program. This literally means the development of the last man in the row. Now, this focuses on the identification of the poorest of the four families instead of treating the poor as an abstract category. The scheme was solely relied on the economic criteria for selection of the beneficiary families, which is the poorest of the poor. Another program is that the Integrated Rural Development Program. This was considered to be the single largest poverty eradication program in India. The program sought to salvage rural poor from scourge of structured poverty. The program seeks to achieve enhanced rural productions, greater socio-economic equality, spatial balance in social and economic development, and broad-based community participation in the process of development. Next program is the Training of Rural Youth Self-Employment. This program was made to eliminate increasing unemployment among rural youth. Under the program, rural youth in the age of 18 to 35 years old were targeted for necessary training of skill improvement so that they could earn their own livelihood. Another program is that the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, it is considered to be the milestone in the history of rural development in India. Unlike previous employment generation schemes, this legally guarantees employment to Indians' poor population. The underlying objective of the act is to eradicate poverty from various pockets of rural hinterland and to make villages self-sustaining. This scheme focuses on some issues like water conservation and water harvesting, drought proofing, irrigation canals, and others. Number two, provision of irrigation facility to land owned and household belonging to the land of beneficiaries, and land reforms or that of the beneficiaries under Indre Awas Yohana of the Government of India. Number three, renovation of traditional water bodies. Number four, land development. Number five, flood control and protection works. And lastly, rural connectivity to provide all-weather access. The last two programs are Major Urban Development Program and Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission. Now, the last program is an enormous city modernization scheme undertaken by the government of India way back in 2005. It is a total investment of whopping 20 billion over a period of 7 years. This flagship scheme was launched to improve the quality of life and infrastructure in the cities. Assistance provided under this program can be grouped into two categories. Number one is submission for urban infrastructure and governance, and number two, submissions for basic services to the urban poor. Now, there are major objectives of this program. These are: number one, focus attention to integrated development of infrastructure services in city covered under mission. Next, establishment of linkages between asset creation and asset management through a slew of reform for long-term project sustainability. Ensuring adequate funds to meet the deficiencies in urban infrastructure services. Next, plan development of identified cities including peri-urban areas, outgrowths, and urban corridors leading to dispersed urbanizations. Scale up delivery of civic amenities and provision of utilities with emphasis on universal access to the urban poor. Next is special focus on urban renewal program for the old city areas to reduce congestion. Lastly, provision of basic services to the urban poor including security of tenure at affordable prices, improved housing, water supply and sanitation, and ensuring delivery of other existing universal services of the government for education, health, and security. As an evaluation, rural development gets optimum priority in overall national planning. The priorities, however, keep changing from time to time, depending upon the socioeconomic context and obviously political complexion. The first 5-year plan embodied country's obsession about nation building with equity. The Rural Development Program during the second 5-year plan, however, had to suffer a huge setback as the national priority was tilted towards rapid industrialization. Consequently, agricultural productivity, which was the mainstay of the first plan, had to suffer a massive deficit too. The middle of the second plan, the specter of an emerging food crisis, the need for a new approach of increased food production was doing rounds in the administrative circuits. A group of Food Foundation-sponsored American agricultural scientists had mooted the issue of an alternative program of intensive agricultural production to compensate the shortfall and to avert the crisis. Accordingly, the IADP was born as a package program launched to 8 more districts. The major objective of this program was to augment agriculture productivity through the use of complementary inputs and services at the farm level, but eventually it was found that the growth-oriented program of 1960s failed to reduce rural poverty. Hence, a host of special programs were directed towards weaker sections and economically depressed areas to bring down rural poverty and backwardness through self-employment. Intervention in terms of minimum needs program was made to supplement other income generation programs along with provision of civic amenities and communal facilities. However, rural poverty refused to die down despite above efforts. The programs, however, failed to make any major headway in the overall situation of rural India. Some new programs were introduced, while a few old were discarded, and the experimentations continued. Political interventions further complicated the situation, as political parties with their own agenda do often intervene in the rural development and try to build their own constituency. Now, the government of India started to make a formal policy deal with the voluntary sectors. Now, the policy acknowledged the partnering role of voluntary sector, including community-based organization, NGO, civil society organization, and so on in the national development. Now, this policy recognizes 3 instruments of partnership: Number one, consultation through a formal process of interaction at the center, the state, and district level. Number two, strategic collaboration to tackle complex interventions where sustained social mobilization is critical over a long period of time. And third, project funding through standard schemes will soon be developed. Now, the government will ensure that these three instruments of partnership are given due attention in annual plans prepared by the ministries and the states. We now move on to concluding observations. Decentralization has been identified as one of the most important prerequisites of good governance. If one starts tracking the evolution of concept of decentralization, you will find that the concept has no fixed ideological fountainhead. Traditionally, it was conceptualized as an organizational innovation to ease off the pressure of over-bureaucratic public organization. But with the onset of globalization, the concept of decentralization has become the surrogate of the market. India has embarked upon decentralization experiments. They have transformed the very complexion of local governance from a subjugated status to that of a self-reliant one. These amendments have accorded constitutional recognition to rural and urban local bodies and have addressed the persistent problems. The new process has democratized the local self-government at rural and urban areas and brought substantive democracy at the grassroots level. Though India's decentralization initiative coincided with India's entry into the free market economy, it was not driven by force of globalization. There were serious political compulsions before the political leadership, which had forced them to bring forward the issue of local democracy. Under several anti-establishment movements, sharing power with communities at the grassroots level was conceived as a desperate attempt to release the mounting pressure on the Indian state. After the initial hype died down in the form of over-politicized lack of accountability, lack of clarity in delegation of power and authority, state intervention, and the resultant lopsided developments, the following steps need to be taken to make local governments true self-governing institutions. The people need to be properly mobilized to shoulder the responsibility of governing themselves. Hence, to make local governance truly participatory, the opinion of people concerned needs to be honored. Secondly, the third stratum needs to be strengthened by harnessing several stakeholders of development like the government, non-governmental sectors, civil society organizations, and private business houses. Third, the local governance need to be seen from a holistic perspective. This is because rural and urban development cannot be conceptually segregated, as the success of one is squarely contingent upon the success of the other. On behalf of my co-reporters, I'm Justin Reluyao, Shane May Roterio, this has been Maria Cecilia Calbasa, signing off. Thank you.